You're listening to Transresistor Radio. I'm your host, Aaron Franz. My website is theageoftransitions.com. Please go to theageoftransitions.com to listen to past episodes of Transresistor Radio, and I hope you'll subscribe to the feed. You can download episodes directly from the website, so I hope you will do that. Save those episodes, listen to them anytime you want. You can even take the audio and make your own videos with them and post them on YouTube, but I highly encourage that. I have lots of other material up on theageoftransitions.com as well. I have articles, videos. I have a link to my book that I wrote, Revolve Man's Scientific Rise to Godhood, so I hope you will check all of that out. theageoftransitions.com. Transresistor Radio is brought to you in part by ProXPN.com, which is a virtual private network service provider. You really ought to look into virtual private networks because they're very good for using internet anonymously, for protecting your identity. And with ProXPN's premium service, you can do all sorts of neat tricks. For instance, if you're in a country that does not allow you to watch a certain video or access a certain website, well, just use ProXPN's virtual private network, and you can use it as a workaround. So the website will think you're actually accessing the internet from another country. That's pretty funny, huh? So no more restrictions if you're in a country that can't get certain material. That's with ProXPN's premium account. Lots of other benefits to the premium account too. I have a coupon code at theageoftransitions.com, coupon code TRESRA in all capital letters. You can find that coupon code in the links tab, also in the products and services tab at theageoftransitions.com, which also has a link to proxpn.com where you can type in that coupon code and get 20% off premium service, and that might be something you're interested in. So check it out. You can also use the free VPN service, so that's just a little test, but the premium service is certainly much better. Also, I have Amazon links at theageoftransitions.com. If you ever do any shopping at all on Amazon for any products whatsoever, perhaps you're a depraved maniac that builds battle bots in his basement. Maybe that's what you do in your spare time, and you need all sorts of servos and different sorts of robot circuit boards and robot parts and whatnot that you buy on Amazon. Well, if you buy all that stuff, be sure to click on the banners at theageoftransitions.com first, because the banner will take you straight to Amazon. That's the same as usual. Just do your shopping wherever you buy. It doesn't cost anything extra to you, but there's a small referral fee that Amazon kicks back to me just for the referral. And of course, all of the guests I have here on Transresistor Radio that happen to be authors or otherwise have products on Amazon.com, you can buy their stuff there. Be sure to click through the banners first, and I hope that you are buying the books of my guests, because all the guests that I have on the show I really respect, and they all have good material. So check it out, theageoftransitions.com, the Amazon banner, and the guests, more importantly, the guests. Today on Transresistor Radio, I speak with Darryl Sloan. Darryl is an author, a filmmaker, and a musician living in Portadown, Northern Ireland. His website is darrylsloan.com, and his latest book is I-Universe. We talk about I-Universe, and we talk about a broad range of philosophical issues on the show today. I know that listeners are going to enjoy this one. So please be sure to share this episode with others, and thank you very much. Enjoy the show. Today on Transresistor Radio, I have Darryl Sloan with me. So I want to welcome you to the show, Darryl. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
Yes, it's very good to talk to you. And before even doing the interview, I kind of want to mention this, that you're an author, a self-published author, and you made a video about self-publishing. Actually, I watched it a couple of years ago when I was considering self-publishing a book, and that video itself was actually very inspiring, and I was it made me realize that self-publishing was something within reach and something you encouraged people to do it. So it was an encouraging thing for me, and I ended up self-publishing my own book. So I just want to thank you for that video, because it helped me out.
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, it's one of those videos that I was making that long before I was ever into any sort of esoteric things. It's just this one-off video that I made because I had published 2 science fiction novels and made a reasonable success of them. And I was also conscious of things like Frank Herbert's Dune. Mm-hmm. It apparently went through something like 25 traditional publishers before it was accepted. So what if Frank Herbert had stopped at publisher number 24? We'd never have had what is possibly one of the greatest science fiction novels of all time, So there's something to be said also for going out on your own and having complete control of your own work and just making it go, because, traditional publishing, it's all about trends, marketing trends.
Yeah.
At a time when vampires are popular, you can publish vampire books. If they're not popular, you can't. And it's got nothing to do with quality. It's just a business.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, your books, especially your fiction, you've won a few awards on your books, have you not?
There was one small award on one of them, but it was really just from a book reviews blog. It wasn't anything spectacular, but it's nice that it came out top, of all the books that were reviewed that particular year.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. It's exciting to get recognition like that, and I'm just very excited to have you here, because you're somebody who I definitely relate to. With you have a YouTube channel, and you are very prolific with the videos. Actually, you put out quite a few videos, and I find that your opinions are very balanced. You don't tend to go off into any extremes. You ask a lot of questions of everybody.
Some people might disagree with you there about extremes.
Oh, well, actually, yeah, there you go. How so?
Well, the thing that really made my subscribers take off and grow is I sort of became known as someone who was into experimenting with telekinesis or psychokinesis. I originally came onto YouTube really just to find information about this topic. And I guess it's kind of a weird topic to look for, but I'd had an experience when I was about 13 of witnessing psychokinesis, and I thought it was real. I mean, I went through various phases in my life of maybe it was real, maybe it wasn't. But the guy who was my friend at the time, he always maintained that this was for real, even, 25 years later or thereabouts. So I was getting into all this sort of esoteric stuff about everything's one underneath the surface and all this kind of stuff. And it was a sort of worldview, sort of philosophical worldview, where something like telepathy and psychokinesis could be possible. So I started getting into it and trying to do my own experiments, and some of them were successful. And I ended up sort of becoming known as the go-to guy almost for good information on this topic, information that wasn't just very obvious fraud, which is what you mostly see. So I wouldn't say that my views are kind of typical. They're kind of out there, but I do tend to be very rational, and I back up everything that I say.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. You're covering a topic which is controversial, but that's good. So many topics will just get thrown out the window just because of pre-assumptions, and people assume that there couldn't be any sort of basis in reality for something like telekinesis, when in fact, if you do an honest investigation, there's value in that, and perhaps there is some real aspects to phenomenon which you have come across in your own investigations. And again, you encourage people to do their own investigations too, which I think is really the best thing to do. Yeah, I mean, the resistance to it comes, I think, from really two sources. One is that it is the sort of field where there are charlatans, and they abound. Mm-hmm. But the second one is that most people
who are scientifically inclined are kind of reasoning under the shadow of Isaac Newton, as it were. Under quantum theory, I don't understand quantum theory. I don't know the mathematics, but I've read a couple of books about it. I understand the basics of what's being claimed and what we seem to know. That basically, a particle can be in two places at the same time and can be separated by a distance as wide as the entire universe, basically, and you can change the state of the particle in one place and it will change in the other, regardless of space and time. So it's like underneath the surface of reality, everything's one. It's interconnected in some way as a kind of field. It's not structured as lots of separate objects that are stacked together like Lego blocks in physical space. And that's the world of Newton. It's the world where everything is materialistic and it's based on these deterministic principles that are absolute.
Yeah.
When I think it can be, a lot of scientific people are still thinking as if that is the prime reality, whereas it's really the quantum thing underneath that is the prime reality, and the reality that you see is just a veneer on top of that. So until people come to start thinking of reality in those kinds of terms, there's always going to be a resistance to any form of mind-matter interaction over space, or any form of mind-to-mind interaction over space that can't be possible via traveling over distance, like radio waves and such. So it always struck me that, in terms of getting a real solid empirical basis for that sort of philosophical outlook, an investigation into psychic phenomena is one area where we might get that. And I think I've successfully proved it to myself, but it becomes very, very difficult to prove it to other people, because it just seems to be that psychic phenomena, real ones, are very, very slippery, and they don't conform to the principles of determinism that, gravity always holds you down. That's deterministic. Whereas psychic phenomena, it just isn't. It's real slippery. And, the obvious example of something like that is the kind of things that sometimes happen between twins, where there seems to be some sort of link between them, where if an accident maybe happens to one twin, the other one suddenly gets the feeling that something terrible has happened, but they don't know why. And then they find out in an hour's time that the other twin had an accident. This sort of thing that isn't really explainable. But if you take that twin into a laboratory and say, okay, it performed for us, make this happen, tell me what the other one's thinking, it doesn't work like that, because they don't really know why it happens. And the funny thing about me, although I don't know much about telepathy as such, the funny thing about my experiments with psychokinesis was, when I started out, I had no kind of rule book. I didn't know how to tell good information from false information, so I was mostly just running on myself and not really relying too much on what anybody else was saying. And I thought, I'll just figure it out. If I'm persistent enough, I'll figure it out. And then, lo and behold, I got a couple of results. After about 21 days of trying, 3 weeks of trying, I got some results. Small, but very definite. And I didn't know why it happened. That's the thing. Sometimes things can move just with the power of thought, but it's very hard to know what you did to make it move. And it's very hard to pin it down to a specific method that you can just repeat on demand. It just doesn't work like that. And the only thing that the only abstract sort of technique that I can really point to is that it seems to work when you can get to a state of thoughtlessness or a state of daydreaming. So people keep asking me, what do you think about that makes it move? And I answer, nothing. And they don't understand that, because I don't really understand it either. How do you actually get something to move if you're not telling it to move? But if you get into this state of nothingness, this seems to be the state of mind that is conducive to psychic phenomena happening. Yeah. And it's the same also with telepathy. From what I've read about telepathy, it seems to be about getting into some sort of trance-like state where you're not thinking about anything and where there is a kind of receptivity that occurs that it's almost like if you sort of take your attention away from the five senses and from brain-based thinking, you discover a subtler aspect of yourself that can then come to the fore, indicating that there's maybe some kind of substratum of mind that underlies all our minds that's interconnected, and that even underlies matter, and even possibly that underlines time itself, if there's any truth to precognition. So it's a very fascinating subject, and it's something that you can play with. It's something that anybody can play with, and can possibly get some evidence for themselves, but it's just very hard to take it to the lab and give definitive proof to people who are viewing the universe entirely as a kind of automatic machine based on deterministic principles. And it's been my growing conviction that you can't just define reality as what they call space-time. It kind of needs to be what you might call mind space-time, if you imagine that all as one word. There's a general ignorance, I think, in the scientific community of the importance of mind. And there's the feeling that you can kind of just dismiss it as something that is purely to do with organisms, humans, animals, and not something very important at all. But there is this thing that they call the hard problem of consciousness. The hard problem, that's the technical term that they call it. So we don't understand why there is subjective experience at all, why there is this I feeling, because it corresponds to nothing else. No matter what we do in nature in terms of tool building exercises, we're never going to construct consciousness because it's not something that's made out of parts. It's, at least that's not the way it makes sense to model it to me. It's more something that underlies the material realm. It's kind of like, rather than seeing the mind as something that inhabits a body, which is really just something that, came out of Christianity with the body and the soul and other ancient traditions. But we sort of need to outgrow that into a different model. And the only model that the scientific community is proposing is that consciousness isn't really real, which is a complete denial of experience. But a better model, I think, is to see the body and the mind as a kind of focusing mechanism for consciousness. And consciousness is this sea of energy that underlies everything that exists. So it's kind of like saying that the whole universe is one thing, experiencing itself via these multitude of focusing points. It's a very different way of looking at it. It's kind of like saying that your mind is an aperture. Your mind is not anything metaphysical in and of itself, but it is an aperture for the metaphysical. Yeah. It's kind of like you're this, if you try to define yourself as some big fuzzy somethingness, some essence, and it just becomes focused by means of brain-based consciousness and by means of probably everything. Because I think in some sense the whole universe can be defined as an experience of, I don't want to say a mind, because mind is just one aspect of it, but it's an experience of the universe experiencing itself. Yeah. And I know that's very abstract, but for me it forms the best sort of hypothesis for what's really going on, rather than just the traditional space-time model.
Yeah.
Oh, that was a bit long-winded.
No, that's good. This is all great stuff, and there's so many points I'd like to address there, but one that really pops out to me was when you're describing telekinesis and how it works when you kind of clear your mind, get in this meditative sort of state where you are sort of in tune with nothingness. This is an odd sort of phenomenon that I think it's only through experience of that nothingness that one understands what you're talking about and how you can make things work like that. And I know I've had similar encounters with nothingness. I don't know what you want to call it, but just the profundity of trying to understand everything and nothing simultaneously. And that you made a video actually that kind of it's probably the best explanation I've seen that explains this phenomenon, because it's near impossible to explain it without the experiential thing happening to the listener. But it was the one where you were explaining the symbol of the wagon wheel. You got onto symbol, but you started with a dark void. You know that?
Yeah, I mean, the weird thing about consciousness is that it takes two. I know some people in the sort of non-dual community, if there is such a thing, they kind of think of the ground of being as pure consciousness. They would call it pure consciousness. But then I have to ask myself, what is pure consciousness without any subject-object relationship? And I can't conceive of that, because it doesn't seem to be anything at all. It's kind of like saying, you know, if we go back, if we take a theistic model, if we say God, right? If there was not the universe, what would God be? You know, if he's not conscious of anything other than himself, is he even conscious? If there's nothing for him to have power over, is he all powerful? If there's nothing for him to see, is he all seeing? And you sort of realize that God, if we want to model it that way, is as dependent upon the universe as the universe is upon something beyond itself. So it's kind of like saying, you know, it gives me a kind of intuitive hint that possibly the reason why there is anything at all, or why there is a universe of duality where things appear to be separate from each other, is that if they weren't separate from each other, the ground of being itself would be nothing at all, because it would be utterly formless. And it's a difficult thing to wrap the mind around. So, you know, when I hear about people, you know, experiencing non-dual consciousness, I get a little skeptical, because non-dual consciousness to me is no consciousness. It's nothing. You know, it's the absence of consciousness, because there is nothing to be conscious of. So if you want to, you know, try to get away from your mind, if you want to get, you know, some weird transcendent experience, you just cut your wrists and kill yourself.
No.
You know what I mean? Because it's like there's your route back to the essence. Obviously, we don't want to do that. So that gives us maybe a hint of why there is dualism. Why there is the appearance of dualism, because if it weren't there, the universe wouldn't be able to experience itself. So the thing is, duality really is just an appearance. I mean, we know that from quantum theory. And you can take your mind through various exercises backwards, in a sense, out of itself, towards this kind of, shall we say, towards this non-dual essence. Now, you'll never get there, because to get there is to not be alive. But if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
But you will get to a kind of halfway house, which is sort of, you're not quite interfacing properly with the body and the mind, but you're part way backwards into that essence where everything springs from. So it's from there that you can actually interface with the world in a way that is not typical. So you're interfacing with reality, not using the body and not using the mind, which is how one mind can see what another mind is doing, and how one person can actually physically make something happen in the world that's not supposed to happen, such as with psychokinesis. But it has to be said, you know, the results there are very, very subtle, because, you know, the laws of physics do apply. And when psychokinesis is done, I don't think it's breaking the laws of physics. You know, I get these super skeptics who say, oh, okay, well, if you want me to believe this, why don't you just levitate that pen right off the desk? And I can't do that, because gravity applies. Gravity still applies. And there's so much inertia in an object of that weight. There has to be sufficient energy to be able to accomplish it. And the energy seems to come from within the person. At least that's the kind of experience that I've had of it. I mean, one particular occasion that stands out a lot in my mind is when I was trying to get a psi wheel to move underneath a glass bowl. And a psi wheel, just for your listeners' benefit, is basically just a little piece of tin foil cut into a square, and shaped into a pyramid and set on top of a needle, so that there's very little friction and it's a very lightweight object that can move. So I've got a big glass bowl, creating a dome over this so that air currents won't blow anywhere near it. And I've got my hand beside it because I'm trying to imagine some sort of force being projected from the body. So I'm imagining this happening and nothing's happening. And then after a couple of minutes, I just start to get kind of bored and I start to daydream. And in that daydream state, which is a kind of a light trance, I feel something emit from the palm of my hand. Just like a little bit like a static shock, but not quite as not painful. Just, I felt something come out of the palm of my hand, and it arrested my attention again. And I looked at the side under the glass bowl, and it started to move. And it gave a couple of revolutions, and then it stopped again. And that was one very profound example of how I knew I was onto something, because there was a direct causative relation between what I was doing with my mind and what my body did and what happened underneath the glass bowl. But again, people say, hey, go and take the James Randi $1 million, go and claim your $1 million. I just know that if I went and did that, I would sit there and it would feel, because it's real hard to make it work under lab conditions,
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, it was that light trance, or that getting out of your own mind, so that your mind is not quite focused in the way that it normally is in waking consciousness. That was what allowed it to work.
Yeah,
and it worked. I was not thinking about making it work. That's what's even weirder about it.
Yeah, I hear you. This it's funny. This whole discussion of sort of meditative state nothingness and the pondering of things greater than oneself has got to be, at least in my mind, the most important thing out there. However, you walk a thin line with this stuff always, because there are a lot of folks out there who are just they're out for transcendental experience and they're looking for that. And I think if you're out there looking for some sort of out of this world experience, that's a bad angle to come at this, to come into things. It's asking for trouble.
Yeah, and I mean, I kind of went through that phase as well, but I didn't get too hung up on it. Yeah. It was, I started, because I came out of Christianity. Mm-hmm. That was my background before all this. I started to come to a very profound realization that man as a creature is not fallen. He's not in a fallen condition. There's nothing wrong with the animal nature, just as it is. And this, the more I read about evolutionary theory, this had a lot of rational backup. And I started to really understand myself and almost heal myself in a sense, because Christianity tends to keep you in this position of self-hate, because you're taught that the flesh is sinful and the flesh must be fought against and all this sort of nonsense. But of course it doesn't seem like nonsense when you're trapped by it. So coming from that sort of a background, I kind of get the feeling that when people are searching for transcendental experience, they're trying to get away from their suffering ego. And they're maybe still caught with this notion that there's something wrong with them that they have to transcend. Whereas I'm very in tune with the idea that everything's perfect, everything's working fine just as it is. Mm-hmm. And almost, materiality, there isn't this sort of matter-spirit divide. The material universe, this is the transcendental experience. Yeah. In a sense, this is consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. So it's kind of like my question is, what are you looking for? What are you expecting to find? And I know there are some writers that I really like that are really into this kind of thing, like Alan Watts and Aldous Huxley, really brilliant writers, and I love so much of the way they think. But they're very much defenders of the psychedelic experience. And maybe that's okay, but I've just never felt any traction for it. I've just, more and more just been enthralled by the world that is before me, and coming to realize that you're actually home right here. There's nothing to get to because you're already home. Nothing was broken from the get-go. Yeah. And I think that's what transcendentalists are they're trying to fix something that's broken when they don't realize that it isn't broken,
Yeah, no, I hear you. I'm glad you brought up the Christianity subject, because I know it has, I don't know if you'd call it debunking Christianity, but just challenging standard Christian dogma has become the main, I'm going to say the main theme of your videos now. Would I be correct in saying that?
Well, no, it tends to just form the background of a lot of things I want to talk about, purely because it's my background. And a lot of people are still caught up in it. So it is definitely a major theme of what I'm about. And it is, in a sense, debunking Christianity. But the thing about that is you'll never debunk Christianity if a Christian doesn't want to be debunked, because they'll always retreat into some form of irrational thinking that allows them to wriggle out of anything you've said. So I'm very careful that the people that I'm really speaking to are those that realize, those Christians that are unhappy with it, that realize something's not right, but they can't get clarity about it. And it's just to offer a helping hand to those. And it's kind of like I'm trying to talk to the person I used to be 10 years ago, because I'm sure other people are like that. But I'm not going to be one of these people who are constantly ranting against Christians, trying to, shake them until they wake up, because if they don't want to, they won't. And you just got to I'm just trying to be a rational voice for people who are confused. And I know there are some Christians who listen to that and think, oh, that's like, he's just a slave of Satan.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Trying to deceive the world.
Yeah. Now, I agree that the church itself, Christian church, and any church really, tends to fall into idol worship, and people, they'll start worshiping Jesus as the historical figure, and the historical figure, Jesus, gets wrapped up in this grand religious myth, too, that people take 100% literally. However, I feel that I personally feel that there is some value in the allegories behind Christianity, and even it gets very complex and esoteric in the allegories. And I think there's a certain beauty in there and actually purpose in there. But I was wondering, do you see any redeeming value in Christianity? What good aspects are there about the religion, if any?
Yes, there are good aspects to Christianity. If you'd asked me that 4 years ago, I would have said there are none, because I was coming out of it, Yeah. But having got a more balanced outlook now, yes, there are redeeming aspects, just like there are redeeming aspects to all religions, because religion is basically man reaching out to God, or man reaching out to something beyond the world of his senses. Whether you call it God or whether you call it the void, as the Buddhists might, doesn't matter. You're just trying to reach out for something beyond what you see, because you intuitively perceive that there has to be more than this. So that's good. That's noble. There's nothing wrong with that. It becomes problematic only when it becomes authoritarian, which is, instead of seeing it as man reaching out to God, it's portrayed as God reaching down to man and speaking authoritatively to man through his alleged representatives, who will now rule over you and tell you what to do. That's the real poison in it, So I am still fascinated by religion, and not everything Jesus said was bad. I mean, he said, "I and my Father are one," which is a statement that could be taken more than one way. I mean, if we understand, I have a sense that maybe Jesus was not quite how he is portrayed to be, in the sense that, to give you an example, I listened to this modern guy, he's dead now, what was his name? Anthony DeMello, that was his name. I was listening to a series of lectures that he produced called Awareness, that you can actually find online. And he's a Catholic priest, and yet when I listen to him, he's not preaching the Christianity that I recognize. He's preaching something very, very different, and I think he got into a lot of hot hot water for doing that, because he was essentially preaching the same sort of stuff that I believe, but he was putting a Christian spin on it. Yeah. And I thought to myself, that's an interesting way to go about things. Now, whereas my approach is more the sort of adversarial approach, whereas his approach was more, well, let's just talk to people where they're at. So I have a feeling that the original Jesus, and it's just an impression, it's not something I can prove, because Christianity has this embryonic period where we don't know an awful lot about what went on. Until it became this power structure in the 4th century, we don't have all that many records to go on. So originally, I think it's quite possible that Jesus was somebody who was not really a Jew in his thinking, but decided that in order to communicate effectively with the Jewish people, he was going to put it in a framework that they could understand. But he was not preaching Judaism. So he was saying, you have heard that it was said, you shall love your I can't remember the exact, love your friend and hate your enemy, or something like that. But I tell you now, you must love your enemies. He was changing things. Yeah. And when he says, I and my Father are one, the traditional Christian church has interpreted that to mean he is one with the Father in the Trinity Godhead, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But what if he actually meant there is no separation between the consciousness of a person and the consciousness of the infinite, or God, or whatever you want to call it? Yeah. That there is a oneness, there is no separation between God and man. What if that's what he actually meant? What if he wasn't actually putting himself up as, the son of the boss man upstairs kind of thing? We don't know. But at the same time, he wanted people to follow him, which is instantly a no-go for me. When someone says, hey, follow me, that's just, I lose respect instantly for that, because I would never want anyone to follow me. Yeah, I hear you. I would just try to stimulate their thinking. And in fact, I need people to think of it differently from me so that they can actually point out where I'm going wrong. Mm-hmm. That's very important to me, because I recognize that it's actually very hard to be right. If you look at the whole history of mankind's learning from the past, you go back to the Greek times with the philosophers right through to the present, there's a constant replacement of bad ideas with better ones. Not necessarily true ones, just better ones. And then the ones that we think are true today are probably going to be somewhat replaced with even better ones. So it's very hard to say, oh, I'm right, and you're all wrong, I can get some appreciation of what Jesus said, but other stuff, no.
Now, do you think there's a natural predilection in people just in general to follow a leader, and perhaps that's why the church has come to take the form it has now, where people just kind of want to obey it and just kind of blindly follow it and be given historical and religious myth about Jesus, and so that they have this figure to put all their hopes and dreams upon, and it's disempowering to them? Is this an inherent thing within humanity?
I think it is, yeah. I think we're basically a pack animal, a herd animal. But, just like in the wolf pack, there's always going to be an alpha male, and there's always going to be a pecking order and stuff like that. And I don't want to give it, I'm not saying that humanity is like a wolf pack in every respect. That's just an analogy. But I think there's a distribution of talent across the human race, and that applies to everything about us. My singing ability, for instance, is terrible. I'm sort of okay at playing a music keyboard.
Very good, I would say, yeah.
Good but I would say as a thinker, I'm pretty good. Whereas some people just aren't, and don't actually want to be, and have no interest in any form of deep thinking, and are simply incurably built to be followers. And they don't care about the pursuit of truth. And that's just how they're built. And I think the world is always going to be like that. There's always going to be people who just want something to believe in, to follow, and don't really care very much about, is this really true? Whereas I have always been obsessive about finding the truth. And that goes right back even to my early days as a Christian, which is why I was so darn uncomfortable with Christianity for such a long period, like about 18 years. You know, I couldn't make it work because I couldn't let go and just obey and not think too deeply. And that's ultimately why it all fell apart for me. But other people are perfectly comfortable with it. And I don't even see that there's much of a reason to change them, really, because I don't know that everyone's capable of it or that everybody wants it. Yeah. So I think there's always going to be, an esoteric side to the human race where there are really deep truths to be figured out for those who want them. And then there's going to be that exoteric side of just common everyday religion and even common everyday science too. Because that's part of it too, you know. I mean, we all go through high school and we end up knowing a thing or two about atoms and about just, you know, the general laws of physics, but we don't know a darn thing about quantum physics. And most of us never will unless they pick up a book about it. But you're not really getting to the esoteric stuff about what's really going on with the universe until you do that. So some people just want the exoteric. They just want the easy stuff because they just want to get on with life and, doing their job, coming home to their wife, raising kids. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. Not really. It's just there's always going to be both. It's just unfortunate that sometimes the people who are caught up with the exoteric, they tend to be quite vicious and outspoken and can make life uncomfortable for somebody like me, whose opinions are absolutely not what the masses are.
Yeah, you're right. It's funny how it seems like you're talking down, but the less you know, the more vocal you become. It seems to be the trend.
Yeah. You see, I know that some people believe in a kind of a spiritual awakening that's coming soon.
Yeah.
I used to flirt with that. I don't know if you do or you don't, but I don't anymore because I've come to realize that there's actually nothing wrong with the world as it is. It's not perfect in the sense that we have an idealized mental picture of what we consider perfection. But it just is what it is, and it's perfect as what it is. And I know that's a kind of a strange thing to say, but if you really look at the universe, one of the real fundamental things I came to appreciate about it, and I came to appreciate this about the universe via Satanism, of all things, so that's another whole can of worms. Well, hear me out. Yeah. For instance, we'll get into Satanism later if you want. But,
Sure.
Basically what I'm saying is there is something about the universe that is satanic on every level. And what I mean by satanic is adversarial. Because Satan just means adversary, right? Yeah. So it's a very theatrical way to say the universe is satanic. It's a very theatrical way of saying the universe is adversarial. It is one thing versus another. So if you look at a droplet of water, you will see little microbes that are at war. If you look, if you consider the human immune system, it is constantly battling invaders all the time, more than you're even consciously aware of. So then if you take it up another level to larger organisms, such as creatures, humans and animals, well, certainly it should be natural that they are against each other because that's the way the world is. And then if you go, to another higher level again than that, outside of conscious organisms, right to, planetary bodies, we have supernovas. Look at the destruction that is wrought from a supernova. There are comets whirling around that are crashing into planets, doing untold damage. So on every fractal level of the universe, there is this principle at work in that there is one thing versus another. Yeah. And I never lose sight of that. And I think an awful lot of spiritual belief systems don't take this into account or don't see it. And there are these whole massive edifices of belief that are built on this faulty foundation of a kind of wishful thinking that things can be different and ought to be different. Yeah. When it really just boils down to the whole thing is just a big, massive game of energy conversion. Because it all boils down to energy, ultimately. whether it's, electrons changing, or microbes battling, or creatures killing each other for food, or asteroids flying around, or supernovas, it's all energy conversion. And that's kind of why it can't be any different, which is why the world is perfect as it is, perfect in its imperfection, which is a kind of a strange thing to say.
No.
So I really learned that very deeply through Satanism. I mean, I could have learned it in a number of ways, but that's where I learned it through. And it became a very important cornerstone of how I look at life. And I'm one of the very few people who, in non-dual circles, who think in this way, because most of them are all about love, it's all about, the oneness and the being together. Mm-hmm. But I'm thinking, well, you know what? You still have to kill something to eat. And even if you decide, well, I'm gonna be a vegetarian now, and I'm only gonna kill plants. Well, they're alive too.
Yeah, exactly.
And there was a point in our evolutionary history where the division between plant and animal had not yet been made. Mm-hmm. So we really are the same stuff when you get back far enough. Mm-hmm. So it really does make no difference whether you kill an animal or whether you uproot a carrot. It's all the same stuff.
Yeah.
So you just have to accept it, that this is the way the game is played. And then, then the reaction comes, oh, that's terrible, I can't accept it, that's awful. But then, the next big realization that I came to was it's not serious. Yeah. That's the only thing that makes this tolerable, is that it's not serious. Uh-huh. And that's how I understand life. It's ultimately not serious. Even when we take it seriously, that's all part of the not seriousness of it, in a sense.
No, I think that's a great insight about the adversarial nature of everything. And you're right, how that just simple realization of how things work gets lost so often. And you get movements like transhumanism and a lot of occult ideals like Telema and things like this. Their ideal is to end all suffering, and you got to end death, and that just it's coming at this. It's labeling how things are as a problem, and then the way I see things is their solution is a problem, just because they're not approaching things from from the perspective that you're saying. They're not being accepting of how the universe actually is.
Yeah.
That's a real issue.
See, we've made death out to be something absolutely terrible. Mm-hmm. And it's so terrible that and really it seems terrible because there's a break in consciousness. There's a cessation of consciousness where a personality that we created and nurtured throughout this life and a set of memories that we've held onto, it all just stops. So because we can't stomach that, we then invent afterlives for ourselves where it has to go on. But, I have a whole different way of looking at that. And death is not so terrible at all. It's kind of just a break in continuity. If I understand my real essence, the real me, to be not a soul residing inside this organism, but the universe itself, that's the real me, the whole universe, or the infinite, as I sometimes call it. If I understand that as the real me, then this is just more like a shell that I'm using for the time being. I am also existing inside you right now. You just feel different from me because you have a different personality and a different set of memories. And so, a good way to try and illustrate this is to think about, pick a random date 7 years ago. Like if I say the 20th of September, 7 years ago, what were you doing on that day? Now, for me, I can't remember a darn thing about that day.
Yeah.
It's as if it didn't happen. It's lost, But I was obviously very alive on that day, having experiences on that day that felt meaningful. So here's the thing. What's so important about today? It's just another day that you're going to forget 10 years from now. Well, I might not forget it because it was the day I had this interview. But, tomorrow, say, probably nothing remarkable will happen in my life tomorrow, and I'll forget tomorrow 10 years from now. So then I have to ask, well, what the hell am I actually trying to hold on to if the whole thing is constantly leaking out my backside? I can't hold on to anything. It disappears like a vapor. Yeah. And I start to realize that the only thing I'm really afraid of with death is a break in the continuity of my consciousness, where a personality and a set of memories are stolen from me before I'm ready to let go of them. Mm-hmm. That's all it is. Yeah. Consciousness will always go on because the whole universe is consciousness experiencing itself. Yeah. You just have to learn to not be so darn attached to a particular personality that you're using right now and a particular set of memories that you're holding on to.
Yeah, no, I do.
So it's a very different way of looking at death. But when you start to look at it that way, and it takes a while to sink in, it really does affect your life in a good way. You take it a lot less seriously. You find a lot more enjoyment in it, especially if I compare it to what it was like in a few periods in my life when I was an atheist. An atheist of a very, very materialistic side, where I didn't believe in anything metaphysical, where, I always had this sense that my time was running out and that I only had this one life. And gosh, it seems so meaningless because it's going to end. None of those feelings apply because you've redefined yourself as the entire universe and taken away your fierce attachment to your ego. So again, it's a little bit like the sort of stuff you would read from the likes of Eckhart Tolle, but again, he brings that whole love vibe into it that I just don't see.
I hear you. Yeah. So your books, Reality Check, which has morphed and evolved into iUniverse, they contain all these ideas, right?
They do, yeah. Those and a whole lot more. Reality Check was made I wrote it in 2009 over a period of, I wrote it in a real flurry of activity over 26 days in 2009, which was just a year after I had withdrawn from Christianity and started to get into these new ideas. So it's very much, I still like it as a book, but it's definitely, it needed a few creases ironed out of it, and it needed a lot more work put into it. There's a lot more interesting things that could be augmented into it. So I had a choice of whether I would write a second book or whether I would actually try to add stuff to the previous book. So it began by just having some bonus chapters that you could download in addition to buying the book. But then there became more chapters, and then I started to take a couple of chapters away from the original book, and I ended up rewriting one or two of them completely. Yeah. And the whole thing just evolved out of all proportion into something that's not, I wouldn't say it's different, because the same basic understanding is there, but it's over twice the size, and it's an awful lot more accurate. There were some inaccuracies that had to be dealt with. So it's not a sequel, it's a replacement. iUniverse is a replacement for the first book, and I decided just to give it away free rather than to purchase a paperback, or to produce a paperback, at least for the time being, because I keep tweaking it, I keep changing stuff, adding stuff, and I can't seem to stop myself, because that's the process of human knowledge. I mean, we keep moving forward, we keep having to replace what we think we know. Yeah. So although I think at one point I do want to produce a paperback of it, but maybe even within a year or so, because I think things are starting to finally settle now. But there's about 300 pages worth of material in there that's basically free for any of your listeners to download as a PDF file from my website.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, they definitely ought to. When you're talking about constantly reworking it, I think anybody who has done any sort of creative project can relate to this, because you'll finish a project and then later, maybe a couple of weeks, maybe even a year later, you'll go back and watch it. You're like, you know what, I would change this now. That kind of, it makes me think of that, like the constantly unfinished project. Anybody can relate to that. I think it's good that you are exploring further territory. That's a good thing to do.
Yeah. And I mean, in regard to the self-publishing thing that we were talking about at the beginning, I could have brought it out as a book and tried to sell it and tried to make money and stuff, but it became more important to me just to try and reach more people. more than would ever have bought the book, because, I mean, to this day, a reality check, it's sold maybe about 300, which is kind of decent for a self-published book.
Yeah.
But in terms of downloads, iUniverse has been downloaded several thousand times.
Oh,
so
wow.
that would,
Cool.
that would never have happened. And the money I made from those 300 copies of Reality Check, it's so little.
Yeah.
It's less than what I would make doing a week's work at my job.
Mm-hmm.
So I almost think, why bother? Give it away free, and also give it away or also release it as a paperback for people who want their dead tree versions, as it were.
Yeah.
But I think, I'm kind of excited about technology, in that we live in an era where it is actually possible to do that with a book, to actually just write it and say, here, there you go. And anybody anywhere across the entire world can just read it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a cool feeling to be able to share something like that, for sure.
There's also the side of things like, when you start out as an author, you don't really have an existing fan base. Mm-hmm. So if you start out by giving away something free, well, then you're actually building a fan base that you wouldn't be able to build otherwise.
Yeah.
Or at least you would build it much slower by actually forcing people to buy a book. So it's definitely one strategy that's actually worth considering.
Very cool. Very cool. Now, I want to talk about one little aspect of your personal life, being that you don't have a TV and you don't have a car. I just kind of want to address this real quick, and could you talk about that?
Do you know what's funny? I just bought a TV about 3 days ago. I've been sucked into the HD thing. I've been watching Blu-rays around a friend's house, and all I had was this. I do love movies, and I had this projector system in my living room linked up to a DVD player, so I would watch DVDs. But I've started to get seduced by the high definition of Blu-rays, so I actually invested in a television. So I can no longer say I don't own a television. But I gotta say something, I don't watch it. Yeah. I just don't. I'm not one bit interested in 99% of what is out there for consumption. And when I turn it on and flick through a couple of channels, I get depressed because of the sheer amount of junk that is on there. And it strikes me, having been away from television for so long, it strikes me as so weird that we actually sit and subject ourselves to, every 20 minutes of time that you watch a TV is interrupted by at least 5 minutes of advertising.
Yeah.
So an entire quarter of the time that you're in front of a television, you're watching stuff you don't want to watch, which is just advertising thrown in your face. Mm-hmm. Most of which is designed purely to appeal to the emotions, to manipulate you into basically buying stuff you don't want or need. Mm-hmm. Totally irrational. Purely, using celebrities' faces just to try and make you feel good about a product that you've no interest in otherwise. All these, deceitful tactics. And there's just a kind of a madness about it. And even, when I kind of would maybe go out for a walk late in the evening, and you're walking past houses, and all you see is the flicker of the television through their blinds. It's kind of like, oh, this is all anybody has to do is to sit and watch TV in the evening.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it becomes a kind of almost, I don't want to get too conspiratorial about it, because I don't think it is really conspiratorial, but it's almost like, if you just didn't have one of those, you'd probably do far more interesting things with your life than you're doing. Mm-hmm. But of course, I've been sucked in now. No, I don't think so. I mean, it's really just, to me, it's just a mechanism for watching my favorite movies.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You don't have like the cable box or anything like that.
No.
Yeah, I understand that. Nothing wrong with putting a movie in every now and again.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you're right.
Oh, you were saying about vehicles as well.
Oh yeah.
I just decided to get back my health a few years back by getting rid of my car and going about by a bicycle. Mm-hmm. Because I just everything I did for the most part revolved around my hometown, and I didn't have a family to support, so I could do that sort of thing. But no, I've invested in a motorcycle now, so just as a cheaper way of getting around, it's kind of fun.
That's cool.
It's an interesting, I find myself almost spiritualizing the experience of riding a motorcycle, because it's a far more kind of feeling of being in the wild than it is when you're sitting in a car. When you're in a car, you're in a box, and it's like you're stuck here. It's almost like being in a room. You can relax, lose concentration. Whereas on a motorcycle, you've constantly got the wind on your face. You're constantly having to pay attention to how you're leaning the bike and steering the bike, and what your feet are doing and your hands are doing. And there's much more required. And there's also the feeling that road users don't necessarily see you too well, so you've got to be extra careful.
Yep.
And there's just also this real excellent feeling that you've augmented your body with this vehicle that is like a part of you for the duration of the ride. Because I kind of have a weird view on evolution, in the sense that this ties in a little bit to your sort of transhumanist themes, but it's not so much augmenting the body by inserting stuff into the body, but there's a sense in which you can't separate the organism from its environment. So for the duration of the ride on a motorcycle, I become man-bike.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And even, if I was riding past some kid and he sticks his thumb up at me, that's because he sees man-bike. It's like if I was just a man walking along, he's not going to stick his thumb up.
No.
And he's not sticking his thumb up at an inanimate motorcycle. He sees man-bike,
Right, yeah.
So it's kind of like you've got to think outside the box. Even when you're thinking about something like evolution, you've got to think outside the box, where it's like... and I think this is, if you look at a lesser animal has the necessary tools within its own body to do what it needs to do. The lion has the big teeth and the sharp claws, whereas we just have these hands, which don't have any blades on them, and yet we need to actually kill to live. So we actually augment our environment to do that. So we become, when we pick up a knife, that knife, for the duration of the time it's held, becomes part of the body. And I think of evolutionary theory in those terms. You now cannot separate the organism from the environment. So it's just kind of interesting to play with ideas in that sort of a fashion. And
yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm a bicycle enthusiast myself, and I know exactly what you're talking about when you're saying the use of all your senses to stay alive. It's you have to pay attention out there, and I think that's one of the best parts of it personally, because it puts you in a state where you have to be aware. It forces you to have full awareness. I think that's a good thing that gets lost in day-to-day life for most people, actually. And I think that's just a good experience to have.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Are you going to Sturgis this year?
Sturgis?
Yeah. It's a big motorcycle rally in South Dakota.
Oh goodness, I haven't even heard of it.
Okay, then.
I'm in Northern Ireland here, man.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I knew that, but for Sturgis, people go a long way for that. Oh boy! But I want to thank you very much for being on the show today, Darryl. And before you go, I want to have you tell listeners your websites and the YouTube channel. Let them know where you can find your stuff.
Yeah, my website is www.darrylsloan.com. That's DARRYLSLOAN. And the YouTube channel is youtube.com/Darryl Sloan. And there's quite a lot of video content there. I normally put out something once every couple of weeks. And just, what I really want to promote is the book, iUniverse, because that's sort of where my real heart lies, and that's where I've put in countless amounts of energy over the past 5 years in developing it. So I hope a lot of people enjoy it.
All right, well, great. And I know that I will be posting links to your sites on theageoftransitions.com in the post for this interview, so listeners can check things out there. But once again, thank you very much for being here, Darryl. I had a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me on your show. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening to today's episode of Trans Resistor Radio. I do hope you'll check out Darryl's website, darrylsloan.com, and download his book. It's free, so why would you not? Check out his other material. And, of course, be sure to go to theageoftransitions.com. You can download this podcast. You can get the links to Darryl's websites on there. I'll put a link to his book and all that on the website, theageoftransitions.com. Thank you again.